And you're back with the Doin Time show, and we've got a special Mayday broadcast here as well. And next up, we're going to be speaking with Kieran, who is the president of the Black People's Union. And the Black People's Union is for First Nations people, whether employed, unemployed, incarcerated, on country, off country, remote or urban. And it fights for sovereignty, freedom and self-determination, which is to be established via a real treaty between all Indigenous people. We're going to be speaking with Kieran presently about the atrocious history of forced labour and stolen wages and the fact that there is slavery in this country. Hello, Kieran. Welcome to the program.
Hi, how are you going?
Good, and you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks.
Getting ready for the Mayday action today?
Yeah, we're setting up in about 15 minutes, 20
Fantastic. So tell us about, what you feel and also what you've experienced and read about, and what the Black People's Union basically, how do I say this? What is it about slavery that really gets to you in this country? Can you tell us a bit about the history?
Yeah. There's a few things I can talk about this. So I suppose one of the big things that kind of gets to me is how here in Australia we don't refer to it as slavery. Australia, people in Australia often associate slavery with, say, the United States of America. But what a lot of people don't realise is we had slavery just the same as America right here in Australia. We've got a long history of it going right back to colonisation. And it's not something that's just been passed down by word of mouth from us mob either. It's a very documented thing. There's legislation people can go and read up themselves, past legislation both before and after Australia's federation that talked about the treatment of slaves, how, these people could be hunted down if they left the job site without permission, and the sort of different punishments that they could be subjected to. There was a whole bunch of legislation and stuff. But I suppose to get into it a bit more, here in Australia we had a few different races and ethnicities that were subjected to slavery throughout different points of our history. It began in the mid-1800s. It continued in different forms right up until the 1970s. It involved plantations, there was cattle ranches, there was mines, there was different construction work that people were sent to work, forced to work on. Our people were used as maids and servants and nannies for rich households and big institutions, especially our kids and women. They would often be sent off to work in these institutions or these larger households. As well, there's a whole lot of stuff I could touch on.
Sure.
I suppose I can just get straight into it if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Yeah, so take the plantations, for example. The conditions on these plantations were often very similar to the conditions experienced by slaves in the United States on their slave plantations. Workers were subjected to long hours. They were given inadequate food and medical care. They were often punished brutally for, even minor infractions. Many of the workers lived in, squalid conditions, and they had little access to stuff like clean water and basic sanitation. Between 1863 and 1904, to touch on some of the other races as well, between 1863 and 1904, there was an estimated something like 62,000 Pacific Islanders who were blackbirded and taken to plantations throughout Queensland and northern New South Wales. They were brought over on indentured servitude agreement, but, once they got here, they were sent straight out to the plantations to be treated as slaves. Their contracts were extended indefinitely, and they had horrendous working and living conditions. Those Pacific Islanders were brought here by Australians at first, white Australians, that is, but later by American slave owners. And there's actually a big connection that a lot of people don't know about between the American slave owners and the Australian plantations.
Okay.
So back in the mid-1800s, when America was moving towards abolition of slavery, a lot of the really wealthy plantation owners sold their plantations and actually moved to Queensland over here in Australia. On the way across, they stopped in at various different Pacific islands, most notably the South Sea Islands. There they, blackbirded mob onto boats and brought them over to Queensland on these false agreements that, they would have to work for a few years and then they'll get their freedom. But once they got here, these agreements were just ripped up and these fellows were sent off to plantations alongside us mob to have to slave away. And that's why there is such a close connection today between South Sea Islanders and blackfellas up in Queensland because of that shared sort of history. But it wasn't just Pacific Islanders as well. There was also African Americans who were brought over with some of those slave owners from America. And there was also Chinese and Bengali labourers in the goldfields here during the mid to late 1800s. Just like the Pacific Islanders, they were brought in on indentured servitude agreements that weren't honoured. Those workers end up being subjected to poor working conditions. They had long hours, little to no pay, and they also faced massive discrimination from white Australians, which quite often led to riots and even massacres. I suppose moving on a little bit from that though, slavery was officially abolished here in 1901 when Australia federated. That being said though, the use of indentured labour continued on for another 6 or so years, and it was only officially abolished in, I think, 1906 or 1907, after a few years of campaigning by different labour unions and activists. Despite this, though, of course, Aboriginal slavery wasn't counted as any form of slavery or indentured servitude, and, our mob was still subject to slavery right up until the 1970s. To touch on a bit of like a personal experience,
Yep.
Before my time, of course, but my grandparents were a part of this, we call it stolen wages, but at the end of the day, let's be blunt about it, it's slavery.
Yep.
When you force somebody to work and you deprive them of payment, that's the definition of slavery. But not just my grandparents, even my own mother, 3-4 years old, she's got memories from when she was 3-4 years old, being sent out to the bean fields to have to pick beans, and, she'll be out there for 12 hours or more at a time in the hot sun. If they were lucky, they'll get a 5-minute break once or twice throughout the day to go down and get a drink of water from the creek, if they were lucky. But, this is the sort of legacy we have here in Australia, and people don't realise it. We don't teach it in our schools. We don't talk about it on our media. When people think black slavery, they think America, but it's just as synonymous with Australia as it is with America.
Absolutely, and that's why when we were speaking off air, I was so glad that you were mentioning these topics, because it simply makes my blood boil. The stolen wages. Yes, it's true, it is stolen wages. But even in this inquiry that I was having a look at, it was a submission that I think was made in early 2006. Have you heard of it? The Commission welcomes the committee's inquiry. Many issues involving the underpayment withholding of wages earned by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people remain unresolved. And this was put out by the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like, they talk about a stolen wages, and as if it's just some petty little industrial dispute where a employer hasn't paid their employees in time, but it's nothing like that. It's a whole institutionalized event.
Well, yeah, because didn't they actually want people to get wiped out?
Yeah, well, exactly. And, like you think about as well how we were classed as fauna and flora for, the main part of the last 200 years. I suppose by that logic, in their minds, we weren't slaves because we were animals. You wouldn't consider a cow on a farm or, a chicken in a barn to be a slave.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite ridiculous. But, even today, though, this stuff is still ongoing, even today, to a lot of extent. Like, when we think about the prison slavery system here in Australia, people like Angela Davis have spoken at length about how the capitalist system just adopts to prison slavery after racial slavery gets abolished. And it's no different here in Australia than it is in America yet again. Look at today, for example, we have our highest percentage. Australia has the highest percentage of privately owned prisons anywhere in the world. Like, we've got the highest percentage of privately owned prisoners right here in Australia. And our brothers and sisters get locked up in this system. They get put on labour programs that pay ridiculous amounts per hour. Some of them are getting 50 cents an hour or less. At most, I think some of them are getting $2 an hour for labour. And, how can you justify that as any sort of wage, 50 cents to $2 an hour, especially when our mob that are locked up in there on these prison labour programs, they're being exploited, all the stuff that they're making is getting sent off to big, massive retailers like Fantastic Furniture to sell for full price, to, make massive profits off of. And it's just another form of black slavery at the end of the day, especially when you consider that we're the most incarcerated race on the planet and that we make up massive amounts of inmates in jail.
It's very true. And, you're saying similar to what Marianne McKay from WA was saying before this interview. She was talking about exactly the same thing. And actually, there are quite a few people that are saying no to the Voice as well. It's not just the Black People's Union. There's quite a few, First Nations people that are very much against it. And it is connected, isn't it, to Mayday and slavery? How can we make those connections?
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, everything is connected because it's all connected to our economic system. That's what it all boils down to at the end of the day. Even, things like colonisation, imperialism, et cetera, like the inequality between the genders, between the races, all of this stuff, it all ultimately boils down to our economic system. All of the problems we see in society aren't standalone problems. They're just symptoms of one disease, and that one disease is this exploitive, oppressive, capitalist economic system that we all live under. Now, this system has to mobilise itself in such ways where it can continue to exploit the general working class. And by, coming forward with these different, like prison labour programs, it allows them to exploit the most vulnerable members of the working class for the maximum amount of profit by, paying them literally scraps. Like there's nothing else to describe it as except for scraps, especially when they're in prison paying full price for stuff like, basic necessities like soaps and shampoos and toothpaste. Like, could you imagine working a whole day long and at the end of the day you've made enough money to buy a bar of soap or a tube of toothpaste?
Wow.
Yeah, it's like that's how ridiculous the situation is here. But yeah, it ties into things like the Voice as well because, again, the Voice is just this paternalistic, tokenistic measure set up by our capitalist government to look as though they're doing something and so they can give themselves a pat on the back. But at the end of the day, it's not going to do anything to improve the material conditions of our mob. It's not going to do anything for those fellas that are locked up in prison working for $1 an hour. It's not going to do anything for, the mob out in the rural and regional areas fighting for their land, fighting for their sacred sites against stuff like mining and logging development. It's not going to do anything to improve anyone's material conditions. All of this is a way for the government to funnel taxes into the pockets of their friends while giving themselves a pat on the back saying, look how great we are, we've solved the Aboriginal issue.
Yeah, anyway, it should be the Aboriginal people themselves that it should be solving the issues, not the politicians. Yes,
100%, exactly. And that's a big thing we believe as part of the BPU. We're all about self-determination. We don't want to be a part of the colonial agenda. We don't want to be a part of the capitalist agenda. We want to be in control of our own affairs and in control of our own economics and our own politics.
You're on the speakers platform for the upcoming rally at 5:30. Do you plan to speak about the Black People's Union and tie it into Mayday?
Yeah, I'll be giving a speech at 5:30. I'm also the MC for the event.
Wonderful.
So, I might have a little bit extra to add in here and there. But, I will be giving a speech just after 5:30 where I'm going to be talking about Australia's role in the broader imperialist domination of America and the UK throughout the world. And, what we can do here in Australia to try and resist that.
Do you have the pamphlet on you about the rally?
I do not, sorry.
No, that's okay. I'll announce the speakers later.
No worries.
I've got a bit of a list here. I'll look it up later. But anyway, rock up. I believe there are a couple of people from Bangladesh who is from the garment industry. And there's also stuff, they're talking about migrant issues as well.
Yeah, we've got a few different groups from across the world who have all come down, and they're going to be giving various different speeches about the different struggles their own people are facing elsewhere in the world.
Listeners may remember that Kieran actually came onto the show a couple of weeks ago and spoke about the Voice to Parliament. Kieran, do you have any final comments that you wanted to make about that or just about slavery in general?
Look, I've spoken plenty on The Voice. I might just quickly mention something on slavery, though.
Yep.
one quick thing I did want to bring up is just the stolen
course.
wages campaigns that have gone ahead. They're in various different states. There has been class actions that have been lodged against many of these individual state governments to try and seek some sort of compensation for these stolen wages. Now, while I recognise this as having a wonderful potential in that it is, a way to try and seek some sort of compensation and some sort of, I suppose you could say, for lack of a better term, reconciliation around this sort of stuff. At the end of the day, the way it's set up as well is just another farce. Like, there's no other word to explain it. They're set up in highly restrictive ways where quite often descendants of people who are a part of those, stolen wages of that slavery, they're not able to claim on behalf of their ancestors. If their ancestors have passed away, then that's it. Like, that family is no longer entitled to claim for anything. And then, when we think about the impact of intergenerational wealth and how this is just another way to deprive blackfellas from building intergenerational wealth. And even the blackfellas that were successful with this claim, in Queensland, for example, they got $190 million as a part of a big class action against the stolen wages. This was divided between 10,000 people. Now, when you divide $190 million by 10,000 people, it works out to about $19,000 each. Now, $19,000 isn't even close to a minimum yearly wage, but yet this is meant to compensate for, some people, it's compensating for a whole entire lifetime of slavery. And this is the sort of scrap that they're still giving, even today.
That's actually a really fantastic point that you've made there, that it actually looks good on paper, doesn't it? But it's just the crumbs.
Yeah, exactly. And, people read $190 million and they think, oh, wow, that's a lot of money. But by the time you divide it between the people who are actually eligible for it, they're getting less than half of what is our minimum yearly wage. And that's for a lifetime of work. You know what I mean? Like, this is how ridiculous and ongoing it is.
It really is. And it really goes back to when we had our Aboriginal children at 3 years old having a criminal record just for being Aboriginal. And then from then onwards, they were slaves.
Yeah, it's all tied in together.
Happy Mayday.
Cheers.
Well, I want to wish you the very best for the rally, and you're very welcome to come onto the show at any time. This show is here to provide a safe environment for our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and also, indeed, people from all marginalised communities.
Yeah, I'd love to come back on. I'll get in touch with you and sort out a time and day.
That'd be awesome. Well, thank you so much, and good luck with the rally. So anybody who wants to go to the rally, go to the State Library of Victoria, 328 Swanson Street?
Yep.
Melbourne. And it's at the front, is it? Main entrance?
Yeah, right on the corner across from Melbourne Central. Fantastic.
Okay, well, we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Oh,
right,
before you go, sorry, can
Yeah.
you just tell us what land you're from?
Oh, yep, I'm from the Yuin Nation. It's on the south coast of New South Wales.
It's always good to let listeners know, because it's not about suburbs. We've got to let people know where they come from, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks so much.
No worries.
Take care. Bye-bye.